Okay guys, we're going to just look at private limited companies. So really, what is a private limited company? Well, it's simply a business which has limited liability for its owners. So that means that it is a separate legal entity or thing. It is a distinct legal item from the owners themselves, okay, who happen to be called shareholders in the business. And the fact that it gives the owners limited liability is the main reason why people setting up their own business would choose to set it up as a private limited company to start with. Public limited companies we'll look at in due course. Okay, so what are we going to run through here? It's going to be very short. How you form a company, features of a private limited company, pros and cons. I've already mentioned the biggest issue is the limited liability status. Forming a company, you have a handout in this, but I'm actually going to skip out of this and I'm going to look at okay, so we've just I've just opened here. I just basically did a Google search for company formations 24/7. There was one that just came up as I was typing company formation agents. I was going to type agents, I didn't even get that far. And one of the points that's made a disadvantage of setting up a business as a private limited company is the fact that there's a lot of time, paperwork, and therefore money involved in setting up a private limited company. But in fact, as you can see from this and any number of other online company formation agents within the UK, it's really not very expensive anymore. I mean, here's a bronze pack, and this is quite similar to what I paid for the small business I set up a few years back. And they're $16.99. That's how cheap you can do it for. And in fact, I've seen as low as $12.99. I don't know which is better value for money, but you know, for less than £20, you can set up your own private limited company, and it's completely legal. I mean, they give you pretty standard documentation, but it's all legal documentation that's filed at Companies House. So the three key pieces of documentation they would supply you with would be: number one, a certificate of incorporation, which is basically the birth certificate of the company; secondly, a memorandum of association; and thirdly, articles of association. Now, those documents don't really matter that much for you in terms of the examination, but you can look in your notes and you can look in your textbook and find out more about those if you want. Okay, so I'm just showing it. Like, one of the myths now is that this is expensive and time consuming. I mean, it costs less than £20. It'll take on average 15 to 20 minutes to set up your own company. So it, you know, really, okay, we go with what the textbook says to an extent, because that's what the examiner would judge you on. But the reality is, if you were doing this in the real world, it's absolutely not really the case anymore. Okay, let's get back to our PowerPoint there in just a moment. Sorry for the current slide. Okay, so features and advantages of operating as a limited company. And the key issue is limited liability. That means that the owners, as we call them, the shareholders, the people who put the money in and therefore own the company, they have limited liability for debts, which means that, unlike with a sole trader and a partnership, if your business fails and you are unable to pay your creditors, then the most you can lose is the amount that you've invested in the business. So the total capital of the business. Now, that could be a few thousand, it could be a few £100, or it could be several £1,000s, or it could be even millions of pounds. Some family companies that have been, you know, owned for generations. But they cannot come after your personal belongings. They cannot come after your house, your car, private savings, that kind of stuff. So you and the company are legally distinct, unlike with a sole trader or with a partnership, where the person who owns the business is legally the same identity as the business itself. With a limited company, there's essentially like a drawbridge that you can pull up between yourself and the company when things go bad, which is partly why you have to have this word Ltd, or this abbreviation Ltd, in the title of the business, to warn your suppliers, for example, that if this business was to fail, there's limited liability status and suppliers might not get all their money back. Obviously you can sell shares, which is another advantage because you can raise capital. So you can sell shares to other people who want to be shareholders, which tends to be in a private limited company, would tend to be a relatively small number of people. Quite often this is a format for family firms and for friends, maybe, you know, setting up a business venture together. It's easier to borrow from banks, mainly because there's a higher degree of transparency. Also the fact that the shareholders have invested maybe a significant amount of their own money, so they're taking on a degree of risk themselves, and therefore the banks are maybe more willing to balance that risk with the owners. And also limited companies would tend to, although don't necessarily have, more assets to use as collateral against loans. There's continuity because of the distinction between the owners and the business itself. That is that the owners and the business have separate legal identities. So it would mean that if one shareholder wanted to retire from running the business or owning shares in the business, they can simply sell the shares to someone else and the business can continue as before. And because you have control over who can buy shares in the business, there's no risk of a hostile takeover. We'll see that can also be a downside. Downsides of operating as a private limited company or an Ltd. Legal formalities, the cost and the time. Well, we've just seen an example where it could cost £17 to set up a private limited company, which is not really a huge amount of money. You could use as little as £1 of share capital, and it would take you less than 20 minutes. So although this will work in an exam in terms of a point that you want to make, a downside, a balancing point, whatever, it's not really true anymore, to be perfectly honest. Your accounts are accessible by the public. With a sole trader in a partnership, the only person who has a legal right to see your accounts is the Inland Revenue, so HMRC. With a private limited company, you have to publish accounts to Companies House, and they can be accessed by anyone who pays a small fee, and I'm talking about £1 that you can pay to access via the Companies House web check service online, and you can simply download and print out someone's accounts if they have a private limited company. Not everyone likes that, so if you really want to be protective of your privacy, your financial privacy, and the performance of the business, you may want to consider remaining as a partnership, for example. And also then profits can be divided between the shareholders. That would tend to be paid out as a dividend. Okay, so you've got some other stuff you can work on. You can have a look through chapter 1 in your textbook if you want to revise this further, and through your copious amounts of notes.